We will address today a quite important topic for the industry, for the value chain, for the country and for the world. So it is time to talk about decarbonization. We will present different positions, different activities, and also we will introduce the decarbonization roadmap made by the International Copper Association. The work done by the ICA is doing in this area has been taking approximately 3 years so far. But now we are going to also get together with the Ministry of Environment. There are people from also the mining ministry. There's suppliers of the value chain. There are mining producers and members of ICA. And there's also people coming from the technological hub, introducing new technologies that will help us to go to the goal to have a full value chain decarbonized by the year 2050. To begin, I want to leave you with Tony Lee. He's the president of the International Copper Association, who will have a few words for us. Tony, welcome. All yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Chile launch of the Copper, the Pathway to Net Zero, a roadmap for copper industry decarbonization. As Victor said, my name is Tony Lee. I am president of the International Copper Association, or ICA, or ICA, as it's known here in Chile. First, I'd like to thank all our partners for the organization of this event. Alta Ley and CESCO, we very much appreciate working with you over the last few weeks to get this organized. I'd also like to thank the members of the ICA for their diligence and attention to detail in the development of the pathway. We have several of them on the second panel today, and without them this work could not have been possible. And finally, I'd like to thank the staff at the ICA for seeing us through what has been a complex assignment. Victor referred to the time frames. It was a long process, but they saw it through with great determination and professionalism. Today we have a distinguished set of speakers and panelists, and I'm delighted that Jenny Mega, Head of Climate Change Division at the Chilean Environmental Ministry, and Viviana Huerta, Senior Program Officer of the International Council for Mining and Metals, will be delivering our opening keynote addresses. We'll also receive an overview of Copper, the Pathway to Net Zero, from our own Bernard Respo. Bernard is ICA's global lead on the clean energy transition, and also CEO of the European Copper Institute. In the interest of time, I will leave it to our moderators to introduce the panelists when their time comes. But before we get to the main program, I'm also delighted to introduce a message made for ICA, specifically for ICA, by Inga Andersson, who is UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Programme, or UNEP. ICA has had the privilege of working with the United Nations system for 25 years now, on multiple projects in the energy space, and that is a contribution to sustainable development work which we're very proud to have made. So we could cue up the video from Inga Andersson, please.
The planet, and therefore humanity, is in deep and immediate trouble. The triple planetary crisis, a crisis of climate change, of nature and biodiversity loss, and of pollution and waste, is a threat to us all. One of the vital tasks we must undertake urgently is to move away from fossil fuels to clean energy, and to do that, we do need copper, an essential element in all three pillars of the clean energy transition: renewables, electric mobility, and energy efficiency. While the current emissions of the copper industry are relatively low, increased demand for copper will require the industry to act. Failing to do so will negate some of the gains. This year, the International Copper Association is celebrating 25 years of partnerships with the United Nations system. It's encouraging to see the industry embrace the need for decarbonization with the launch of Copper, the Pathway to Net Zero. But let me be clear. To hit net zero by 2050, the industry needs short-term actions and milestones, including those recommended in the copper, the pathway to net zero. Companies need to disclose progress and show concrete actions year by year between now and 2025, between now and 2030, and all the way through 2050, and provide transparent reporting. That is how we avoid greenwashing, a practice that is, of course, completely unacceptable. Energy efficiency is particularly important, and solutions do exist. For example, higher performance standards for electric motor applications in the 156 emerging and developing economies can reduce CO2 emissions by 325 million tons annually by 2040. This would save electricity consumption equal to the output of 146 large power plants and $43 billion in annual electricity bills. Since 2014, the UNEP-led United for Efficiency initiative has been targeting such gains with partners such as the International Copper Association. The initiative's model regulations for motors and power transformers aims to support the development of legislative frameworks for industrial products, providing an international standard and benchmark for sustainable public and private procurement. UNEP and the broader UN system looks forward to continued partnership with the International Copper Association. Together, let's turn this pathway to decarbonization into reality.
Inga, in her absence, for those kind words, and she can rest assured that all of us at ICA will be paying close attention to the sound guidance Inga provided. So I'll keep this short and close by saying that I hope everyone will enjoy an interesting and constructive exchange over the next 2.5 hours or so, really. And more than that, I hope ICA's pathway to net zero provides a useful contribution to sustainable dialogue on industry decarbonisation here in Chile. And with that, I'll hand you over to the first of our speakers, Vivian Huerta from ICMM. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. My name is Viviana Huerta. I'm a senior program officer at ICMM, the International Council for Mining and Metals. I'm very happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me. And I would like to talk about ICMM and what we are working on Scope 3 emissions. The next slide? Oh, here. Thanks. So for those who doesn't know ICMM is an international organization that have 26 member companies around all the world that together brings 1/3 of the mining activity. And we share our interest of producing mining activity in a responsible way to produce a more safe, just and sustainable world. Together with our members, some of them are today here, we have also 38 associations. Some of them are commodities associations and also national associations, as ICA as well. And we recognize that it's very important to work together in a collaborative way, and we aim to produce leadership in order to achieve sustainability. Sorry. I'm sorry. So our members, we have the position statement that all of our members need to comply. And in October of 2021, we updated our climate change position statement, and all of our members have committed to become carbon neutral by 2050, considering Scope 1 and 2 emissions, so direct and indirect emissions, and also to set short and middle-term targets in order to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. In this process, we have also considered that all of our members committed to reduce scope 3 emissions, to start reporting them, and also set targets by the end of this year. So all of our members are working now in report their emissions from this year, from 2023. They should be reported from every report that they publish since December of this year. And they should, of course, use the TCFD methodology to report them and report them in a transparent way. We have also encouraged them to increase the innovation exchanging technology so we can achieve all of our targets. And what we think that mining has an important role to help achieving sustainable development. We consider that we have already been developed some actions at the mining site. There's been an increase in the use of renewable energy, not only from the energy that it's provided by the grid, but also through dedicated renewable energy projects. We are also undertaking a program, an initiative to exchange the technology of the trucks. So the ICSV program, Innovation for Cleaner and Safer Vehicles, brings together all of our ICMM members together with OEMs. So we're working with them to produce new technology in order to provide electric vehicles for mining operations. And we have already committed to have these trucks for 2030 and even earlier, since 2028, we will see the first version of those trucks. So that is the power of collective action that can help to shift or to produce new innovation and new technology to move away from fossil fuels consumption. And we see that this is a step that can help not only the mining industry, but also other activities. So we are working with that aim to produce an important impact across other sectors as well. We know that on-site emissions are important, but there are also some emissions that are produced over the value chain, and we are also addressing those emissions, as of course our members have also committed to reduce and set targets for reduction targets for scope 3 emissions. We are also helping them to be able to report and set those targets in a consistent way, an aligned way, in order to produce credibility and transparency with with financial sector and other sectors. So we are also working in partnerships to reduce transport emissions, upstream and downstream, and we're engaging with relevant actors in order to reduce all of those emissions that are important. We recognize that mining is very important to the energy transition. So of course, there are an important input to produce renewable energy as are part of the wind farm and also PV panels. And also we are working on circular economy, as these mining of metals can produce a large stocks of renewable materials that can be in place for long. They are not they can reduce waste and also a lot of energy consumption. So that's a part of our work as well. We're shifting the circular economy in order to achieve these reductions that we need to undertake. Considering scope 3 emissions, again, some of course, by the end of this year, all of our members will be reporting all of the scope 3 emissions, but already 33 from our 26 from members, 23 from them are already reporting some of their emissions, including at least one category. 15 of our members are already reporting at least 10 or more material categories. And some of them already have set targets to reduce them as well. And part of our important effort is to produce more partnerships and engage with other sector, of course, considering that Scope 3 emissions are produced outside of the boundaries of the operation of our mine. It's very challenging to address those emissions, but we are working on that, and we hope that we can report and set targets from this year and see positive impact in the industry as well. And I think that was the last one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana, for your interesting presentation and to guide us about the study that the ICMM is doing, not only in copper, but among many metals that are essential for the carbon transition, decarbonization. So I would like to move to our next speaker, Jenny Mager, who is the head of the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Environment of Chile. She will tell us about the work that the ministry is doing in developing this to support decarbonization in Chile. Thank you for joining us, Jenny, and welcome to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I wasn't prepared to speak in English, so forgive me if I'm not just eloquent enough. So, well, my name is Jenny Mager. I'm the head of the Climate Change Division in the Ministry of Environment. And from last year, in Chile, we have a huge challenge. Last year, we launched our climate change law in June last year. And with this, we have a new important goal, because with this law, we say that Chile will be carbon neutral by 2050 at least, by law. So not many countries has this kind of commitment in a mandatory instrument like a law. So for that reason, the scenario and the context of climate change in Chile has changed a little bit, because now with the law we have new responsibilities. Not only, we don't think in climate change only as a sectoral thing, like an environmental issue. We think that climate change is an issue that is economy-wide. So for that reason, we now, with the law, we have responsibility for sectors. We need to develop a management instrument for carbon. And we have to develop plans for transport, energy, and also for mining. So in that sense, when we think in mining sector, we have to think, of course, in copper industry, because, you know, copper is so important for Chile. And also copper, as we saw in the presentation at the beginning, copper is really important for electromobility, for example, and other new technology that has been developed to help to the world to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So I wanted to say that after IPCC report was launched, we saw that industry has many challenges, but they can do things. What this means? There is technology, there is development in order to help industries to reach carbon neutrality. So this is we have hope, as in a manner of sense, but it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be really, really hard to do that in the short time that we have. So working with private sector is a challenge, but at least we saw from the government side that private sector is already committed. I mean, we are receiving a lot of signs that the private sector wanted to do some actions, to take action in the climate solutions. So having a roadmap for carbon neutrality in the mining sector is a great opportunity to push for a new kind of public policy as well, to work together with the government into reduce the carbon footprint of the sector. We know that in the past, this sector has a lot of experience related with energy efficiency, for example, but we know that energy efficiency is not enough at this moment, so we need circular economy, for example. We need to have more options. We need to change fuels. So in that sense, the conjunctions and the joint collaboration between the policies in the government and the options that you have in the industry, it could be like the key solution to advance in this matter. The Ministry of Environment, all with Codelco and Alta Ley, we are working together in a partnership to develop a tool to help the industry to estimate the carbon footprint, but not the main sources of emissions. This tool is a key, it is important because it helps the providers, the services that help and that provide services to the mining to estimate their carbon emissions. And as I mentioned, we cannot just trust in huge energy efficiency measures. We need to work together with all the value chain of the mining in order to have a real reduction of emissions in the future. For that commitment, this tool that we will be launching very soon with Huella Chile, which is the carbon management program that we have in the government, we hope to help all the providers of the mining sector, and we extend the invitation not only for Codelco, but for all others mining companies in Chile to be part of these challenges, to estimate their emissions, the scope 3 of the carbon footprint, and for sure working together to look for new alternatives to reduce their carbon footprint in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny, for the outstanding job that the ministry is doing, and also the Chileans in general are doing and committed. Proud of that goal, I could say. So to end this first block of the seminar, I want to leave you with Bernard Respo. He's a global leader of clean energy transition program at the ICA, who is going to present to us the roadmap, the copper roadmap, the pathway to net zero, recently launched by the organization. Bernard, welcome.
Señores y señores, estoy muy contento de estar esta semana en Chile, el primer país productor de cobre. Desgraciadamente no hablo español, así que permítanme continuar en inglés. Gracias. That was the most difficult part of my presentation. So, dear guest, I'm Bernard Respo. I'm leading the European Copper Institute, which is the European branch of ICA, the International Copper Association. And I also have the honor of leading the ICA activities on climate change. And in these activities, of course, copper, the pathway to net zero, is a cornerstone. These are exciting times for the copper industry today because this transition to a durable, resilient, clean planet open many opportunities for our metal. So therefore, I'm very pleased today to present you the main elements of our pathway to net zero. When we speak about decarbonization, copper has a dual role to play here. On one side, copper is a key raw material for many technologies that decarbonize the economy. And you see some of these applications here on the left-hand side. So it's 25 million tons of copper that are put in the global economy every year. And this number, because of the clean energy transition, this number will grow significantly into the future. We speak about the doubling of copper needs by 2050. On the other side, copper is an energy-intensive industry, so we do generate greenhouse gas emissions. But here we have good news, because copper producers have already initiated many decarbonization initiatives. So we are cleaning our house. And this will be the focus of my presentation today. Today we will answer 5 questions. First, what is the starting point in terms of greenhouse gas emissions by the copper industry? Second, what are the solutions to decarbonize this copper production? Third question, at what speed can we decarbonize? 4, very important, what are the enabling conditions that need to be in place for this decarbonization to happen, to be a success? And finally, what are the practical next steps as of tomorrow morning? And to build our answer to these key questions, we have taken a pragmatic, robust approach, which you will find in Copper, the Pathway to Net Zero, which you can find on our website. We've taken a pragmatic approach which is based on facts, on sound hypotheses, on experience of our members, who did really invest a lot of time in this exercise, and also on the knowledge of industry experts. As said before, indeed, it took us time. It took us 2 years to build this pathway because it's a complex topic, but also we wanted to make sure that we can live through the commitments that we make through this pathway. So what's the starting point? What's the size of the challenge? In 2018, the global copper production emitted 97 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see on this chart, 70% of these emissions were generated in the mining sites. It's linked to the extraction of the ore and also to the concentration on these ores, of the enrichment on these copper ores into what we call concentrates. Then these ores are smelted and refined into pure metal through mostly a pyrometallurgical process, and this is where 23% of the emissions occur. The remainder, 7%, it's mainly in transport and end-of-life treatment. And you can see that we, as I said before, we are an electricity-intensive industry. 45% of our emissions are Scope 2 linked to electricity. In Latin America, our estimation is that the copper production occurring in this continent generates around 35 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So second question, what can we do to decarbonize, to reduce these emissions? Well, we looked with the pathway at all the existing and upcoming technologies that could be implemented to reduce the carbon footprint of the industry. And we have regrouped all these numerous technologies into 4 key categories, 4 abatement levels. The first one is, one of the most important, is decarbonized electricity. It's about getting from your suppliers decarbonized electricity or shifting to producing electricity yourself on site through renewables, wind farms, solar farms. And here, again, things are already happening, especially in Chile. Several members, copper producers in Chile, already supply a significant share, between 80 and 100% of their electricity needs with renewables. So things are already moving there. Second category is alternative fuels like green hydrogen or hydro-treated vegetable oil. This is shifting away from diesel and fossil energy. And here again, we see things happening. Many copper producers in Latin America, and especially in Chile, are members of this public private partnership H2 Hydrogen Chile, which is looking at how to implement green hydrogen solutions in mining. Third category of abatement lever is equipment electrification, shifting away from diesel trucks in the mines for haulage of ore into battery-driven vehicles. Another option is to look at in-pit crushing and conveying, which then reduces the amount of ores that you need to transport to your concentration plant. And as we speak, there are already 2 mines in Scandinavia where they operate with electric haulage trucks. Last but not least, efficiency gains. How can we get more of each unit of energy that we use in the production process of copper? And that's about better grinding media for the mills to get high efficiency there. It's about high efficiency in smelting, leaching operations, etc. And this is really a sector where innovation is key. And we see already good developments, like in the smelting industry. You see the use of process gases, of excess heat from process gases from one part of the process being used to supply energy to another part of the process. So for each of these technologies in our pathway, we looked at what is the abatement potential of each technology. So how many tons of CO2 can be reduced if we implement that technology? How much does it cost to implement? And also at what time will that technology be available at scale according to the volumes of production? And don't forget, the volumes of production are increasing because of the role of copper into the future. When are these technologies going to be available? So that gave us the opportunity to develop a global abatement potential by decade, 2030, 2040, 2050, integrating this availability element of the technologies. And yes, as you can see, for the first decade up to 2030, the decade we're in, the priority is on decarbonized electricity. Why? Because the technology is available at scale and at affordable prices. When we move to the next decade, up to 2040, there we see that technological developments will give the availability at scale of green hydrogen and also of battery electric vehicles in the mines. So that's why you see that alternative fuels and equipment electrification take a bigger role in 2030, 2040, but also that the total amount of tons of CO2 that can be abated is also going up quite significantly in the next decade. And that goes further in that direction for the decade 2040 to 2050. Also important to notice on the bottom part of the chart is that there is an evolution also of the size of abatement potential for scope 3 across time. It starts quite modestly, but what is happening there is that, and I will get back to this in a few minutes, the experience in developing partnerships to reduce scope 3 is taking momentum as we go across time towards the objective of neutrality of 2050. Based on this analysis, ICA members commit to the goal of bringing scope 1 and 2 emissions to net zero by 2050. How did we get to that conclusion? Well, we first built what we call a baseline for scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is what are these emission volumes going to be for the copper industry worldwide if we take a theoretical no-action scenario, a scenario in which copper producers do not take any initiative to decarbonize. And this is these black columns you see in the graph, and you see actually that this baseline of no action scenario, that the scope 1 and 2 emissions do reduce across time. Why? Because the grid is decarbonizing, and we expect the grid to go into decarbonization at an accelerated pace. But that's not enough. You see that 55 million tons are still there to abate in 2050. So we took that baseline and we then took the abatement potential I've just described for scope 1 and 2. And by confronting the baseline with the abatement potential, you see that by 2030, we expect that between 30 and 40% of scope 1 and 2 emissions can be abated with the available technologies at scale at that time. Remember, the trajectory shows quite a nice increase in the next decade. This is why we then reach 70 to 80% abatement by 2040. And that goes up to 85 to 95% by 2050. Interestingly enough, right-hand side of the graph, in 2050, there are still some scope 1 and 2 emissions to abate. It's not zero. This is the pragmatic approach we took with this pathway. We recognize that we don't have all solutions today. But here again, we see that existing solutions do contribute to a significant abatement, but also the ICM members commit to keep investing in research and development to develop the technologies and the technological solutions to get these still to abate amount to net zero by 2050. Reducing scope 3, this is a different challenge. And as for many industries, this is actually the biggest challenge for the copper industry. Why? Because the final decisions to reduce scope 3 are not only in the hands of copper producers. This is why ICA members commit to engaging with the value chain to bring these scope 3 emissions as close as possible to net zero by 2050. But this is an obligation of means. This is not an obligation of results, again, because this is all about partnership. Indeed, engaging with the value chain means we will go into active partnerships with suppliers of explosive, of sulfuric acid, of tires, of transport, to work together to bring the emissions of producing these goods, of providing these services to the copper industry as close as possible to net zero by 2050. And here we've done an initial top-level assessment to try and get an order of magnitude what could be achieved in reducing these scope 3 emissions up to 2050. And this is what you see on this slide as a result, that it's about 10% that can be reduced by 2030, 30 to 40% of the baseline scope 3 emissions, no action scenario, by 2040, and 60 to 70% by 2050. So it's more difficult, as we said, it takes more time, but this is also something we are addressing through partnerships with the value chain. And we are convinced that the fact that all ICM members are aligned on this commitment to reduce emissions, that this commitment will create that momentum that we need across the value chain to work on scope 3. And with our own, as copper producers, decarbonization initiatives and experience, we can really be seen as an open, constructive, supportive, but also determined partner to reduce scope 3 emissions. So in a nutshell, if you put all these together, our commitments on scope 1, 2, and scope 3, you see that we expect the carbon intensity of the copper cathode to go significantly down towards 2050 because of all the actions on scope 1, 2, and 3 that we envision. But we cannot decarbonize alone. We do need the support of other stakeholders. And in our pathway, we have identified 6 key enabling conditions that need to be in place, that need to be realized to make sure that our pathway delivers the net zero it is ambitioning. First, very important, energy-intensive industry, electricity-intensive industry, we need the amount of electricity that we need to operate, and again, this is only going up because of more volumes and because, don't forget, electrification of equipment. We need vast amounts of decarbonized electricity that is available in quantity at affordable price and with the adequate infrastructure. That's not easy. Second condition, we need an effective and efficient regulatory framework in place that does incentivize investments into decarbonization. Examples of what could be in such a framework is definitely faster permitting for installing your own electricity generation capacity assets, a wind farm or a solar farm on your own site. It's about a level playing field for carbon pricing, ideally globally. It's also about facilitating the testing of new decarbonization technologies before they are implemented at full scale on site. Speaking about technologies, indeed, we need these technologies to decarbonize to be available at scale with the volumes that we need for running our operations. And that's where, again, it's really important that we go into this collaborative mode to develop research and development projects that can accelerate the testing, the validation, the adaptation, and the implementation of these technologies in the copper production. Money is important because, as you well understand, decarbonizing requires substantial investments from the copper producers. And there, we want to make sure that financing capabilities are secured, and it would be very much welcome to also have access to public funds to support all these research and development that we still need to do to deal with these still to abate, hard to abate emissions that you've seen are still there by 2050. Recycling can help decarbonizing because when you recycle, when you produce a new cathode of copper from copper scrap, you avoid, of course, the emissions that are linked to the mining. So that can bring a contribution. It's not the silver bullet. We will never go to 100% of recycled copper to supply the needs of the market. But the more we can have systems in place that increase the collection rate of these indefinitely recyclable material copper from products at end of life, the more we can have this, the better it will be for all of us. And last but not least, getting into this new mode of operation also linked to the decarbonization initiatives, artificial intelligence, managing your own energy storage if you have your own intermittent renewable energy capacities on your site. All this requires new skills. So it's important to have the capacities to train the existing workforce, but also to recruit new staff with these new skills, and that's where the collaboration, the partnership with educational institutions on a local or national basis is important. So, what's the way, what's the way forward? Not tomorrow, not today, but I would say even what's the way forward yesterday, because we are already in this active work on decarbonizing the copper production processes. We will focus on 4 main areas of action. First, we will keep decarbonizing as an industry in the broader context of sustainable and responsible production. And here, definitely, the copper mark, this voluntary assurance framework, will help us in this matter. Second, we've used the word quite often today, and I think we will use it further during the panels, partnerships. Engaging into partnerships, we will keep actively engaging with the value chain to make sure that indeed we can live to our commitments and our ambitions in terms of decarbonization. And here it is vital that copper producers and suppliers work together hand in hand to reduce Scope 3 emissions. Why? Because the biggest share of Scope 3 emissions in the copper industry is linked to purchased goods and services. It's also key that we develop deep and broad pilot tests with, of course, suppliers, manufacturers, but also policymakers and communities to accelerate the intake of decarbonization technologies in the copper industry. So a lot of work ahead. But we will keep also being accountable, so we will measure progress on how we do in decarbonizing our industry with an aligned methodology and with a regular reporting which will be transparent and verifiable. And the fourth area of activity, of action, is we will keep our pragmatic approach. We recognize that the world around us does change fast, so we will update the pathway on a regular way to keep it actual. This is not a one-shot, this is an exercise across the whole horizon of the pathway to net zero. So it's time to conclude. ICA members will keep working on both fronts. We will keep enabling the clean energy transition by supplying a key material for many decarbonization technologies. And next to that, the second front, we will keep working on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. You see here the indicative trajectory as a responsible producer of this key metal. So we're very excited that copper is a key contributor to building this healthy, durable, sustainable planet, and resilient planet also. And we are confident in our capacity as an industry to decarbonize, and we are determined in the execution of the pathway. So we're really looking forward to engaging with all of you, policymakers, suppliers, communities, industry, to all together work to make this decarbonization challenge something we go through successfully. So as a conclusion, yes, we can together. Sí podemos juntos. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard, for your outstanding presentation. And it's true, whatever we will have to do in terms of getting to decarbonization, it is a work that must be done in conjunction, together, meaning that mining producers have to work and will work with the suppliers and new entrepreneurs, new technologies, bringing all that into the processes and create at the end the commitment that we are all involved. Thank you, Bernard, for the presentation, and no doubt it's an important contribution for us. So next, we want to leave with you with the first conversation panel of this afternoon, which will be focused on addressing the importance of Scope 3 in the decarbonization strategy of the copper industry value chain. These panels will be moderated by Marcela Angulo. She's director of the University of Concepción in Santiago. And also with her will be Carlos Urenda from Consejo Minero. Carlos, welcome. Will be Mauro Valdez from Minnovex. Also will be again Bernard Respo from ICA, and last but not least will join Philippe Hamangater from Aprimin. So welcome. The stage is ready for you. In your seats, you have three documents, I could say, where we have the summary, the executive summary of COPE, El Camino hacia el Net Zero, COPE, the path to net zero. I will invite you to not really read it, but come into action. So that means in a personal way, in a family way, in a company way also, and in the industry level. So the document basically endorsed the fact that we have to work together, and that'll be the core of the following panel. Okay, thank you.
No, it's perfect. We are. ¿Aló? No todavía.
Sí.
Ahora sí. ¿Ahora sí?
Aló.
Okay. Good afternoon. Well, thank you for the invitation to moderate this panel with these distinguished friends. And thank you, Bernard, for the great introduction that you did for this conversation, and especially for the challenges that we face addressing Scope 3 in the mining, the copper mining industry. And this is exactly the conversation of our panel. So welcome, Philippe, Mauro, Carlos, and also Bernard. So based on what you presented, the first question is an open question. The one of you that would like to respond or to address the question is, free to take the microphone. So regarding the Scope 3 emissions in the copper industry, especially in Latin America, which are the categories that you think are the priorities? Where the industry should focus on in the Scope 3? Carlos, would you like to?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the organization of the seminar. Well, Consejo Minero has worked a lot on this issue. We have 5 groups working on different issues, and 3 of them are related to climate change. So we are very involved in that. We can discuss a lot of what is the focus to attain in first place, but the important thing is to talk about what are the criteria that we are going to use. If we consider the ones that have highest consumption and also highest emission factors, but also the ones that are more actionable. Yeah, with these 2 criteria and with the availability of information also, we have selected some of them. We can discuss, of course, but we think purchase goods and services, of course, all over the world. And the focus is on the production of supplies that are consumed in the mine plant site. For Chile, capital goods also, because we have a very ample portfolio of 70 billion. Also, of course, energy and fuel-related activities, as in many parts of the world, are very significant. And especially considering Chile, we think that downstream transportation, because we are far away from the consumption centers, it's very important to tackle. And clearly, maritime transport is the key issue here. And finally, we would say that processing sold products is also a key aspect. We have to focus on smelting and refining in foreign countries because we have, I'm not saying that not inside. I mean, now the focus regarding Scope 3 should be outside, but clearly due to the high and increasing percentage of concentrates that we export, that's a very important challenge now.
Okay.
No, please.
Philippe.
Okay. Well, the most important thing. Can you listen? Okay. The most important thing here is that now we have a tool to start measuring our scope number 3, measuring the CO2. We have, when you see the categories, of course, you will see explosives, lime, and also mill balls, which are the ones that everyone takes a look and say, how do we handle this? Because probably in these 3 categories we have over 40% of the emissions. But the good thing is that we have a tool, and we want to have a standard tool, and we are very excited that Alta Ley, jointly with Codelco and the bank, the International Development Bank, have support this initiative. We as APRIMIN, of course, we are also supporting the initiative because we want to have a standardized calculator in order to first identify which are the ways we can improve and we can reduce our emissions, and second, to start having plans. Of course, these kind of plans are going to be, short, mid, and long term. And as we said, we need to take care in all the, let's say, the scope of emissions.
Very, very key point.
Yeah.
Start measuring. What is not measured can be managed.
That's absolutely correct.
Mauro?
No, I think, thank you for inviting us to this seminar. It's a pleasure to be here again. And I think when we talk about Scope 3, it is, from our perspective, Minnovex, it is very interesting, that we are reshuffling somehow, the whole economy. Yesterday night, we had a very interesting speech about that. And I think from our perspective, the inclusion of innovation and entrepreneurship in this whole thing, in this reshuffling, in this changing world, is a key thing. I'm very enthusiastic of Alta Ley's work in that regard, because I think for a mining country like ours, it is key to also to contemplate not just the production of copper, but also the production of copper as a leverage to move from natural resources economy to an innovation and knowledge-based economy. And in that regard, I would say, there are, within Scope 3, there are basically four spaces, The downstream emissions, which are transport and smelting and refining. Smelting and refining being a very important one, and Chile was the leader for smelting and refining copper till the 2002. Then Japan overtook us, and then China skyrocketed with its production. But that has key implications for us as well, and we may discuss that afterwards. Second one is the use of copper products. The industry can also work with customers to promote more sustainable practices. Promoting the use of recycled copper, reducing waste, and also the industry can invest in research and development in this particular place. The third space for doing this is the supply chain emissions. This is working with suppliers to reduce their emissions as part of the whole supply chain. I think they're promoting a use of more sustainable materials and processes, more sustainable sourcing practices, or the use of recycled materials in the supply chain could also make it. And the fourth place where I think the Scope 3 goes to is the end-of-life emissions. That's Bernard also mentioned this, but nowadays it is considered that not more than 25 to 30% of the copper consumption yearly could come from recycled copper, but it is still a very, very important chunk. And I think the more reuse and recycling of copper we do, of course, we will help in this new framework, which is acting on the economy, and particularly on the production of copper and related activities.
Thank you. Bernard, would you like to add something about the priorities in Latin America?
Yeah, and I'm very happy to see that, as you said, we need to measure, otherwise it's difficult to manage, but that already there is some good convergence in terms of where the important categories are. We looked at the global copper industry for Scope 3, and what we see is that indeed purchased goods and services, this is the biggest part. So as you mentioned earlier. And in that category, explosives, sulfuric acid and lime, cal, are really big chunks. So these are things already where you can put priorities in addressing it. Another category is fuel and energy related activities, but there the good news is that the more you shift away from fossil fuels, that goes by itself, not 100%, but that's an automatic driver. And downstream transportation, also at the global level, it's not only because Chile is the leading export of concentrates of not yet a full metal product. Also at global level, downstream transportation is the third most important category in terms of Scope 3. In the perimeter we did measure. We didn't take in our study capital goods, and we didn't take the processing of sold products. Now the good news for Chile, indeed your Scope 3, if you include the processing, smelting and refining, the good news is that the ICA members have committed to reduce as smelters their emissions. So that Scope 3 will go down, which means you can also focus on the input Scope 3, which is the purchased goods, and of course there is the downstream transportation, which is quite a challenge indeed, looking at the distance.
Great. You have been already addressing some of the challenges and opportunities. So with this first question, what concrete solutions do you see to address these challenges? Are different types of solutions? You mentioned partnerships between the mining companies and the suppliers, regulatory initiatives, incentives, innovation, R&D, access to capital, and so on. Could you elaborate a bit, Philip?
I would go for the incentives. If you see the EV industry, electric vehicle industry, they are trying to deliver a clean vehicle. And of course, they have to go back all the chain of supply. So incentive will mean that they will take care, where they buy in their lithium, copper, and all the raw materials they need to manufacture their cars. So a car manufacturer is not only concerned on how to deliver the best electronic vehicle, but where their raw materials come from. So this will be incentives. And in the way that we have more incentives, we will have resources to continue developing our local industry. It's like what you are doing at the Universidad de Concepción, in terms of smelters and looking for cleaner ways to reduce emissions. And we have resources, but we need to scale up these initiatives. We need to develop our local industry. We were discussing that, we lost our leadership in terms of smelting and refinery out of Japan and China. And that because our regulations were higher and we were not competitive. But maybe we can be competitive again because we will reduce all this scope of emissions if we manufacture our goods here. But to do so, let's say that we need to take this as a challenge for the country. We have to have the policies, we have to have the industry, we have to have the supplier, we have to have everyone together in order to achieve this challenge.
I would
Mario?
Say, I would say, that regulations have a big role here. Everybody here in this room knows, that smelting and refining is a different business than mining. But is it reasonable, that we continue exporting more and more concentrates and less cathodes, transporting 80% of waste? Somebody could argue, that this is waste. or not, because there is material there as well. But in the end, nowadays, it is waste to the majority. So I would tend to think, the more we start to think in other terms, internalizing these aspects of the copper production, the more the opportunity will open up for Chile in terms of smelting and refining businesses. And I would celebrate also as well, together with you, we were together visiting the facilities of Universidad de Concepción. There are new methods for smelting and refinery, that would entail, a substantive reduction in terms of emissions and based on green hydrogen and a continuous process that, if I were Minister of Mines or in charge of anything of the government, I would put my bet there in order to increase the intensiveness of that effort, not just for reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but also for protecting the industry and the copper industry, and also creating more jobs and creating more opportunities for the Chileans. That would be my bet there.
This brings us to the discussion of the nearshoring approach. What is the impact that, from one side, the efforts that mining industry is doing with the mitigation of Scope 2 in terms of purchasing clean energy or clean energy supply, that is what is happening nowadays in Chile. At the same time, the challenges to address Scope 3, how these conditions could, in some case, reframe the structure of the industry, in terms of creating new opportunities for smelting or refinery, or even moving forward downstream in the value chain. This is a question interesting for our countries in Latin America, because we are now in a condition, as Carlos mentioned, in the short term, we probably will continue to send our copper concentrates abroad. But can these conditions or these trends reframe this structure? Bernard?
Well, I think Chile will, because of the geology, will continue being an exporter of concentrates. Because in other parts of the world where the consumption is also, you mentioned China, well, they don't have their own capacities of mining into that area, so they will need to import concentrates. I mean, that's part of the game, and I think that's where open market economy needs to play that balancing role. And the copper industry today is already very much integrated on that level, and the flows happen in a natural way. Of course, if there is a growing demand also for refined copper in Latin America, of course, that's a question you can ask yourself: should we produce here?
Is that a demand just from Latin America? I would say, if you save that 80% of transportation, in terms of concentrates, and convert that into cathodes,
have to transport the cathodes.
Yeah.
But it's
again, that's where the market decides, because you see also that in some markets they want to have the final step of production very close to demand. They want to have the possibility of multi-source supplying.
Mm-hmm.
So these are market forces that will act in that direction. But the Scope 3 challenge, as I said before, it's not only looking at the Scope 3 that you export by exporting a concentrate that is smelted outside. It's also with the increase of production you will need in Chile. How do you address all these elements of what you purchase, and also of the inbound transport, which is lower than the effect of outbound.
Yeah.
And the outbound, once it's decarbonized, and we see transport companies working on that, that will definitely also help reducing the footprint for the outbound part. But the inbound part is also something that requires attention.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to see initiatives and partnerships
Yeah.
that are holistic, where you integrate the academics, because there is a lot of innovation that needs to come on stream, and that's where the academics can also play a role.
And in terms of the role of partnerships, you know, following with the concrete actions that we can address to mitigate the scope 3. So we have some examples here in Chile. For example, the case of NIX with the production of green ammonia for explosives for the mining industry, and this give us to the role of one side green clean energy, but also the role of hydrogen. So how do you see, especially you, the suppliers associations, the possibility to increase or accelerate this kind of initiatives, you know, collective initiatives to address, you mentioned explosives, lime, sulfuric acid, and so on. And also,
well, I think at least for the mining sector in Chile, suppliers are a key partner. I remember Philippe visiting us at Consejo Minero, telling us that there were many new calculators for scope 3 emissions. And he said, please, why don't we have only one? So this kind of conversation is very important. Companies can't be forced to use one or other calculation method, but clearly we have to work together. We have to share experiences and bad experiences also in order to get to some agreements, because we not only lose or waste time and money developing different ways of calculation or different methodologies, we also impose a very significant burden on our own partners on the value chain. So we have to work together in order to get to common minimums, in order to improve and to be more efficient in all the process. I would like to mention, Marcela, you asked before about solutions. At Consejo Minero, we don't give solutions, very spectacular solutions. We tend to think that when we talk about climate change, we are talking about solving very complicated problems. But for instance, one of the problems that we had 2 years ago, when our member companies set goals for reducing scope 1 and 2 emissions, the problem that we had was that the measures that we had were not all the companies, but some of the companies have measures and reporting only at a corporate or an international level. So it was very difficult to produce that numbers and that goals just for Chile and for mine sites, for instance. So that is it appears very simple, but it was very complicated, and solving it was very, we spent a lot of time with this, and we haven't yet solved it, but we advanced a lot. So these kind of problems, if we working together with the other companies, with the suppliers, of course, are easier to solve. That's for the moment.
Philippe,
Sorry.
Thank you. Just as you mentioned, this is a step-by-step process. We have to look into what are the competitive advantages that we have as a country, and we have to see that we have wind and solar energy largely available. So now there are a lot of pilot projects and projects that they are building up in Magallanes, in the rest of the country, with the potential to produce huge amounts of green energy. And probably we'll have to go first to the ammonia, as you mentioned, in order to reduce the scope of the explosives. And we will figure out in the process how to transport the green hydrogen and how to produce it in a competitive way, because as of today it's still very expensive. But we have to scale up this project. Yeah? It's like what you are doing at the university. So we have initiative at the academy, we have initiative in the private sector, we have initiative in the public sector. But we have to see as a country, how are we going to afford, how are we going to face these challenges? Yeah? Because we have infrastructure challenges in terms of ports, engineering, projects, housing, to convince the people and to build projects that are sustainable and that the population will stick with them. How are we going to build these large projects in Magallanes in a place where, we have few people living there, so we are going to invade them? Are we going to change their way of life? They have almost full employment. What are we offering to them? So how do we develop a new industry, in a good way? We have been building the mining sector for many years to make a sustainable sector. How do we do it in terms of energy? This is the challenge we have. The challenge and the great opportunity as a country to be the leaders in terms of green energy supply.
I would say Chile has been told it is, or has been admired and has been quoted in many places as being, one of the leaders in terms of decarbonization of Scope 2 emissions, and that's largely thanks to mining. Mining industry accelerated very hardly, the consumption of green energy, renewables, and that ended up in being, besides of course a quite competitive legal framework that was developed 10 years ago, that means that nowadays we are in a very fast transit towards decarbonization of Scope 2, which is a lovely thing. I think mining is also understanding, and that's our experience from Minnovex, the importance of tracking not just the electricity or the power generation towards a more or a cleaner one, but also to track their nearshoring suppliers to be able to face, for example, the disruptions we suffered during the pandemics. That's absolutely clear, and we are seeing alliances between Minnovex, Aprimin, and mining companies in order to to face and also under the umbrella of Alta Ley, many initiatives that tend to put forward the frames for open innovation that are giving their fruits. The other thing that I think is important is to face also somehow the problem that's we are not talking about now, but it is implied. That is, the reputation and the legitimacy that mining is now has nowadays. And I think exploiting, those parts of the mining supply chain that may be also a leverage for general development in other things different than mining. For example, mining pushing for hydrogen, mining pushing for like renewables, mining pushing for e-fuels, mining pushing for water, mining using, and there are some examples that are starting to give fruits. For example, here near in the metropolitan region, Anglo-American is thinking on putting a nitrogen hub not just for their trucks but for general consumption, to allowing the rest of the metropolitan region to plug into that. That would be very, very good news, not just for Anglo-American, but for mining as well, and not just for mining, but mining worldwide. Those kind of things are the evidence that it is not mining could not be just tolerated, but also eventually shown as what it is. You know, the mining heroes we were talking yesterday night.
I will put something together with what Mauro says is, you know, like energy, we can do the same thing in water. You know, don't look into water desalinization to use it and to reduce the use of continental water. You know, why don't we build larger desalinization plants, you know, to have a backup for the general population, you know, for human consumption. So, and we will be the heroes.
Okay. Bernard, could you
And it
add something?
links back to, and especially the hydrogen case is interesting because today indeed it's too expensive, green hydrogen, because of lack of size. And if you speak to the hydrogen industry, what they're looking at is clusters. They want to develop clusters where they can produce or supply port areas huge amounts of hydrogen, sizable, and that will help them getting down the cost curve. And I think that links back to this partnership approach where we need to be very pragmatic.
Yep.
So let's look at a few partners. Let's not have too big a crowd because that's very difficult to align. But let's go into pragmatic solutions. And as I'm happy to see that this is coming up and saying, okay, let's have a few stakeholders together to get the size of a hydrogen hub, because this is how you're going to move things forward. Most of the decarbonization technologies are available today, but not at scale. Because of either capacity, battery electric trucks, we will need 16,000 of them worldwide in open pit copper mining by 2050, and they all have to be fossil free, decarbonized. So either it's the capacity or sometimes it's the cost. I mean, hydrogen is the cost, which is the issue. And that's where indeed this out-of-the-box thinking in partnership is very important, because that's how you unlock solutions in a pragmatic way.
Absolutely. And Bernard, I think when you look at Chile, that's particularly true because mining is a huge leverage.
Indeed.
You know, there's 10% of the GDP, 50% of the export. You know, that you cannot leave that aside.
So it's a great laboratorium for looking at solutions. That's very good news.
Absolutely. And a question related to these partnerships is when you see the efforts in Scope 3, it emerges also the possibility to connect with other industry that has a lot of challenges of decarbonization. And if you see, for example, the waste produced by the mining sector, you will find probably a lot of raw material for other industries, for the iron industry, for the cement industry. How do you see these potential synergies between, you know, the copper industry and other industries that are located in the same territory?
What we have seen from Consejo Minero is that if you can differentiate this process from other cases, because in general, the state is chasing companies with new regulations. But in this case, maybe it's the contrary. I mean, legislation is lagging regarding climate change, and the initiative has been from the private sector mainly. When you talk to any business association, you can perceive that conviction. They don't need to be forced, they don't need to be, I mean, of course, incentives help, but they are not always necessary because they have the conviction that this is a necessary process and everybody wants to be engaged in this. So it's easier to develop new projects with other companies. But on the contrary, and again regarding law, and I would like to stress a point that you mentioned, it's about this fully commitment of the Chilean mining sector with producing the minerals that the world needs in order to fight the climate change, but also reducing their own emissions need a new way of seeing legislation. I mean, we don't need faster permitting only for developing new projects. We also need them for installing energy efficient energy efficiency machines, or windmills or solar. So it's good to know that this morning at ENADE, that it's a big business meeting, our President of the Republic announced that we are going to have a process of trying to streamline all the permits. We have had many of these agendas during the last years, and in general, they haven't been very significant in their impact, because in general, they tend to cover only small little aspects regarding digital records or things like that. But it's supposed to be a more profound process now, considering that Chile needs to invest a lot of money in order to develop new projects, and we have to do that reducing our emissions. So that's a double challenge. And again, the final word is that legislation, I mean, maybe can force or can establish some minimums for some sectors that are lagging, but in this case, we need a better and more modern kind of legislation in order to be able to overcome this huge challenge that we have.
Especially because many of these projects are new projects. The first one in its type, and this has been a matter that has been also addressed by Alta Ley and Política Nacional Minera 2050 in terms of, you know, promoting innovation in big projects. Hopefully this time it works
real.
better for real. Okay, so we are concluding our
okay.
panel. I have the last question for you to share your ideas. So the Bernard showed that in terms of the scope 3, with all what is known, we will still have a remnant emissions that we still need to mitigate. So how we can speed up this process, how we can open the options. So what initiatives your institutions, you know, Consejo Minero, the ICA, and also the suppliers associations can do in this regard?
I think one of the good news that we received last week, besides, you know, Los Brotes Integrados approval, which is a fantastic news, is the bidding process. That the bidding process for the ITL, the Instituto for the Clean Technologies, that is being awarded by Corfo, $140 million for this purpose, has been assigned to Alta Ley and a group of universities associated with Alta Ley. I think this is great news. I think those efforts and those funds should go precisely to what you're telling. You know, it's to increase, speed up the effort, you know, and try to exploit these synergies between mining and particularly copper and lithium mining. The lithium is a little bit more complicated, but because of constitutional things, but the constitutional discussion. But we will have also the constitutional discussion. Hopefully, we will address this as well.
It was announced this morning that tomorrow in Antofagasta will be presented the national policy for lithium.
I hope that comes with a reasonable conclusion that speeds up also, you know, our capabilities for producing clean, green, and cheap lithium. But in the end, you know, to foster the innovation and development around these things, and particularly around decarbonization, what we are lacking since years already is appropriate financing. I think we have strong institutions in that regard who understand well what are doing, you know, but the financing has been missing for a long time, and I think this could start changing the game.
Absolutely. We have lost only 4 years.
Yeah.
But finally,
Has been-
good news.
Yeah.
Philippe.
I completely agree with Mauro. The other thing I would like to say is that do not overlook the secondary mining.
Yeah.
You know, secondary mining in terms to reprocess waste, to reprocess tailing, to reprocess escorias, slags from, you know, from smelters. It's an opportunity, but it's not only the way on we process this, it's the way on how do we dispose it, how do we use it, you know, like in circular economy. So first of all, do not overlook the secondary mining because it's an opportunity for Chile to recover its position in terms of being at least 1/3 of the total output of copper production in the world, yeah, which we have been losing participation and we have to retake it. And second, and last but not least, the calculator that we have developed with Alta Ley. You know, this is the tool that we need to use, and my message would be, you know, why don't we work all together with the same calculator, which is something that, you know, we have been working very hard in order to deliver.
Mm-hmm. The value of partnerships and convergence. Carlos?
I don't know if you have realized, but when we talk about fighting against climate change, we are always focusing, prioritizing 80-20, and it's a very sensible way of approaching the problem. But I'm trying to answer your question. If we want to get to zero, we have to deal with that 20% also. Maybe not now, but in the near future.
Yeah.
Because if not, we are not going to get to 100%, 0%.
Yeah.
In our case, for instance, this is a sensitive issue because many times we would like to give a preference to our local suppliers in regions, small. But obviously, they don't have the same sophistication that Philips Associates have. So we are in a problem regarding that. We want to benefit them, but we also need to impose them higher standards, and that's difficult for small producers. So we have a very significant challenge regarding trying to raise the level, but not of the big ones that are doing in a 90%, and we get them to 100%. I mean, the small ones that they are starting with this, that they haven't heard about Scope 3 emissions, that's the focus that we have to put in the near future if we want to get to zero.
Okay. Important to have a combined short-term and medium and long-term agenda. Bernard, your last considerations, especially your suggestions or your
as ICA, indeed, as the leading advocate of the copper industry worldwide, well, we are taking initiatives to support the industry in this direction in addressing these challenges. One of them is indeed to try and develop further an aligned methodology on measuring the carbon footprint with ICMM, with Alta Ley. We like this first pilot of a Scope 3 calculator. This is really the building blocks we can leverage to get to measure the problem, and that helps addressing it. And also, as the advocate, we are at the disposal of our members to speak to the policymakers to indeed create these conditions, these enabling conditions for things to happen. And indeed, regulations are important. Financing is key for innovation. And we see some nice developments. Just to take one example from Europe, it took 10 years before to install a windmill on your site. Now they are down to 2 years, because we've been pushing also with other associations in Europe, etc., to say, well, come on, if you want decarbonization, this has to go faster. But also financing schemes like sometimes, okay, you know that in Europe the biggest export we have is regulations, and the European Commission is looking at indeed increasing some carbon taxes here and there, but that increase of tax will go to funding innovation to decarbonize. So there are some some return flows which could be interesting to flag to authorities and say, well, we need your help, and we might have even ideas on how you could help. So that's where we see the role.
For the Ministry of Finance, in terms of
Another one.
how to address, the reform and the uses of the resources. Okay, thank you very much. It has been very interesting, the conversation.
Muy bien.
Well, thank you, Marcela, for addressing this panel. Philippe, a pleasure, and thank you very much. Bernard, Carlos, Mauro, fantastic panel. So really valuable conversation. Without a doubt, Scope 3 is a key in the challenge of addressing decarbonization, and the industry is essential to work together. So let's define a common strategy. I think we are pretty close to move forward. So next, we want to leave you with a second and final panel, conversation panel, through which we want to learn about initiatives that mining companies are doing and developing. The success and bottlenecks they have encountered in this decarbonization process. It will leave you with Steve Kokola, who is Vice President of ICA. Steve, welcome. Who will introduce ICA members in this the panel. Thank you, Steve.
Hi, thank you. And I'll invite the panelists as they may to come up while I'm setting the stage here, and we'll get into the discussion. So yeah, but Steve Kokoda, I'm the Vice President, Executive Director at ICA. And I know this is the final panel standing in the way of your networking reception, so we'll be expeditious in our remarks. I'll just provide some of my own perspectives to frame the discussion, and then we'll get to the panel. I mean, we've heard enough evidence today that copper and the copper industry are indispensable to global decarbonization efforts and the transition to away from fossil fuels. Bernard's presentation showed that the copper industry emits 0.2% of global CO2, but copper also delivers 2/3 of the solutions that will help the world to decarbonize. And taking that a step further, we know that Chile is the largest producer of copper. 30% of it is produced here. There's a rough tie for the second largest producers between the DRC and Peru. So there's a large gulf between 1 and 2. So I think you could say that Chile itself is critical to global decarbonization efforts. But the industry does face challenges. We also heard that we need to double copper demand by 2050 or copper production by 2050 or sooner, and to do so in an environment of declining ore grades. Ore grades have declined 25% in the last 10 years. To produce all that extra copper with a declining ore grade framework, the expenditures for the industry could approach $500 billion. And that's not even accounting for what they need to do to decarbonize, which a very conservative estimate is about $110 billion. So challenges indeed. The speaker from the Ministry of the Environment, spoke about energy efficiency briefly. She said it's not everything, but it is important. And ICA, I think, does quite a lot to lead the charge in that space. And last week we were asked, along with the International Energy Agency, to meet with the Ministry of Energy here to see if collectively we could build a large-scale energy efficiency program for electric motors in Chile's mining sector. So that's something we're excited about and something that we're getting started with. And I'll just conclude my framing remarks to go back to the very beginning of the day where we heard from Inger Anderson. And the last thing that she said to us was, that we have to turn this roadmap into a reality. So I think that's what the goal of this panel is. We're represented from 5 of the large mining companies here. And in the discussion today, I hope we'll get from a roadmap is theoretical down to the practical actions that will enable the industry to decarbonize. And then with a further lens on that, I hope that we'll be able to, to bring further attention to the framework conditions and the enabling environment that these companies in the broad industry need if they're going to be successful in their decarbonization efforts. All right, so with that, we'll go to the panel, and I'll provide name and title, and they can provide any further introductions you think that are required. And then we'll have a Q&A with them. And then I'm going to leave time for Q&A with the audience. So please use this time to think of questions that you would like to bring to the panel in just a few minutes. All right. We have Marcela Bocchetto, and she's the Manager of Climate Change and Biodiversity at Anglo American. Renee Aguilar is the VP of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs for Antofagasta. Nicole Porchile is Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Codelco. Andrea Vicari is the Director of Responsible Production Frameworks and Sustainability at Freeport-McMoRan. And finally, Angelica Cabrera is the Director of Environment, Health, and Safety Systems at TEC. Welcome to all of you. So I want to begin with, one overarching question for all of the panelists that will hopefully, provide some further context to the topic. And it really is, we've been talking all afternoon about the pathway. All of your companies were instrumental in the development of the pathway, and now practical action. So initial reactions on the pathway, what it means to you and your organizations, and your efforts on climate action. So if it's okay, I'll start with you, Marcela.
Thank you so much. Well, at Anglo American, we have our target to be carbon neutral by 2040, and that is very, very ambitious. I think we are the company that has the most ambition by 2040. So we have a plan to decarbonize our sites according to the realities of the different countries. In the case of Chile, for example, we have renewable energy, and so our scope 2 emissions already are displaced or abated since last 2 years ago, yes. So we're focusing on scope 1, and as you have seen, our bid is hydrogen. We started to develop the hydrogen track in South Africa more than 5 years ago, I think, almost 5 years ago, and it was a pilot, and it worked well. And we had the first try last year in Mogalakwena, which is mine in South Africa, and then Anglo American moved forward with that, and we joined with another company, and we are going to make that prototype into a commercial track, hopefully in the next years. In Chile, we also implemented the first pilot to produce green hydrogen here in Las Tórtolas tailing site, and it is very little, but it show us that we could do it because we had renewable energy, and we use water from the industrial sources, so we produce green hydrogen. And it is, we did the try with forklift, and now we had just launched our study to develop or to see the feasibility of, if it's possible to build an hydrogen hub for the central zone of Chile, where most of the industries are located, and also with the huge emissions that the transport system produce here in the central zone of Chile. So we see that is the fuel of the future. That is the way we're looking for fuel replacement. We have an e-mobility plan as well. We expect to replace our complete fleet of the other vehicles in the next 4 or 5 years. But we know that e-mobility is a small part of the emission reductions for scope 1.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up hydrogen. That's maybe something that we'll talk more about as we go into the next round. Renee, why don't you go next, please?
Much for the invite first. Yes, we've started this journey making public announcements in 2018. At that time, we committed ourselves to reduce 300,000 tons per year on the year 2021, and we started moving on our contracts to renewable. So we were working on scope 2. So last year in 2022, all our contracts for all 4 mining companies in Chile are 100% based on renewables. So that's done. And as Marcela was saying, now the aim is to tackle scope 1. And when it comes to scope 1, 60% of our emissions are coming from haul trucks. So that's the focus that we've got now. And for that, we see a pathway where, of course, green hydrogen is part of that. We don't see hydrogen happening in the next 10 years like an industrial scale already, so we have set a pathway. We're going to start with basically electromobility, and for that we see a pattern of using first trolleys, for the ramps. So we're going to be trialing one of those at Los Pelambres quite soon. So we are in the engineering process for that. So trolley-assisted trucks is going to be the first step. Then we go to electric, battery power haul trucks, and we're doing that for the other operations that we've got in the north. And while we're doing that, we are envisaging, this hydrogen as well technology into the equation. So we see a path where we are basically going to be agnostic in the terms of the final technology that we're going to be using. We want to trial out everything that it's in the market and also be part of the development process of these solutions. So with that, we think that scope 1 is going to be tackled. And at the same time, we are already, buying a lot of electrical vehicles for auxiliary services, in the pit in particular, and also working on efficiency projects, through the processing plants as well. We're very proud because of last year we finished second worldwide in the copper award producers in terms of emissions intentions, so intensity, of emissions. So it's up by 1.75 tons of CO2 by ton of copper produced. So that's a very good, record that we achieved last year. So we're very proud of that. So now again, the focus will be scope 1 and also scope 3, and I think we're going to be addressing scope 3 later in the conversation. Yeah.
No, thank you. Really impressive. And 100% renewable already. And I should have acknowledged, Marcela, your 2040 goal versus, the 2050 in the roadmap. So already some really strong ambition from the 2 companies. And then, and then looking at scope 1, I'm always going to beat the energy efficiency drum, right? So the project I've referenced earlier will hopefully help all of you in your scope 1 emissions. So thanks, Renee. We'll come back again in a few minutes and expand on some of these themes. So Nicole, why don't you go next, please?
Well, I have a couple of good news to share with you. First is that the board, a couple of weeks ago, have approved our new business purpose, and that is to be a pillar of sustainable development in Chile and in the world. That is very strong, and we're very happy about it because this sustainable approach is fighting against the climate change is our core business. So that's really very good news. Saying that, we have a goal.
Right. Thank you. Saying that, we have have you heard? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Saying that, we have a goal for carbon neutrality by 2050. But we have a significant milestone by 2030, that is to reduce 70% of our emissions. We're talking about scope 1 and 2. And where are we today? We have reduced 400,000 tons, that is 7% of our emissions, and that represents 2.8 tons of CO2 per ton of copper. And another good news is that in 3 years more, we are going to reach the 64%. We have already negotiated with contracts with renewable sources. So in 3 years more, we're going to reach mainly our milestone by 2030. What else? That will reach about 1.3 tons of emissions per ton of copper. So I think it's important to share that. And the other thing is that these kind of goals are not sustainable goals now for our business. They are part of our corporate goals. So we also have some goals related to water footprint. We will reduce 60% of the water use, fresh water, and that means that we will have more resilient ecosystems in the surroundings where we operate. And also we are working in very strong biodiversity protection policies. So those goals also work on fighting against the climate change. And also we have another interesting target that we aim to recycle 65% of our waste, industrial waste, and that also we're going to produce the same or more with less input. So the interesting thing is that we are looking at a business issue, and we are working to our value, and also our business model. So it's quite interesting, and I hope that in 3 years more we can share more good news. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Nicole. And yeah, I think that it's interesting and appropriate that you say that, for Codelco now, to be a pillar of sustainable development, not just in Chile and the rest of the world. And as I said in my opening remarks, you're supplying the building blocks, all of you, that are enabling this transition to a more sustainable world. So I think it's appropriate strategy. I'm glad you brought up water. We've heard a couple of times today about how there's a great expectation of a need for increased copper production, and if changes aren't made, right, is that really going to be possible, right? Because theoretically, if you don't make a change, you need twice as much water, and not use 60% less water, and twice as much energy, and everything that goes along with it. So thank you for those reflections. Andrea, why don't you go next, please?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here today. At Freeport, we have an aspiration for net zero by 2050. We've been on a similar journey to all of our colleagues here over the last basically 3 years. We've developed 4 targets at our business units, the first of which was for the Americas, so that includes our El Abra operation here and our Cerro Verde operation in Peru, which many of you are familiar with as well. And that's a 15% reduction per ton of cathode. We are a little bit unique to some of the other partners in the room in that we are vertically integrated, and the way we produce and the way in which our business model works, especially in the Americas, is very integrated. We don't separate out the operations. They truly do produce concentrates and then cathodes for our rod mills and concentrates for our smelter at Miami, and Atlantic Copper, which many of you are familiar with as well in Huelva, Spain. We now also have a target for Atlantic Copper, which we're very excited about, and that's 50% absolute reduction by 2030, which is a little bit easier to achieve from an absolute perspective because it's not going to grow in the same way that our brownfield or our existing operations are going to need to grow very rapidly. And that'll be a bit of a theme that I will probably come back to in a few minutes here. But one of the challenges I think that we all face is that although some of the new technologies are available, such as electric trucks in small scale, we're all trying to expand extremely rapidly because of what Steve just said, right? 2 to 2.5 times the amount of copper in the next 10 to 15 years. And that has to happen very quickly. And so we're applying for those expansions now with the technologies we already have. So that's a challenge. We also have a target that I'm very excited about, a 30% reduction per ton of payable copper for our Grasberg operations. Some of you may be familiar with that. That concentrate goes into Asia predominantly. But as many of you may know, we're also building a smelter and expanding a smelter on the island of Java in Indonesia, and they will come into our targets as well. But that's a very significant reduction, and Grasberg has had a coal-fired power plant for many years. It is the only source of power there. And we're now in a feasibility study for LNG. And no, LNG is not zero, but it is as low as reasonably possible for the current situation there. And so if we're able to progress with that, that will be very exciting as well. And then we have one more target for our molybdenum business, which is 35%, another absolute reduction, which is also very exciting. We've been doing a ton of work. One of the most fun things that hasn't been talked about yet, so I'll mention it because we're doing many of the other similar things to our business partners here, is a program we have called Leach to the Last Drop, which we are extremely excited about, where we are trying to accelerate our existing leach pad technologies to try to increase throughput. We're going after old leach pads that have been sitting, uneconomic for several years, and we're also trying to go after sulfide-bearing ore leaching, which I've got to say that's the key, because if we can figure that out, then we don't need 2.5 times the water, right? Concentration is where we use so much water. So that's one of the things we're focusing on. And, you know, the pathway for us has been great because it's given us a chance to get together with our colleagues and collaborate and learn and get excited about new ideas.
No, great. Thanks for that, Andrea. And yeah, as a more vertically integrated producer, I know you are facing other challenges. And thanks also for bringing in, efforts to, to go to old sources for new copper. I was on a conference call about a week or so ago, and on my phone I got an alert from The Economist about copper, and the interview with Richard Atkerson spoke very well to that point. So, anyway, thank you. All right, and last but not least, please, Angelica, please, your perspectives.
Buenas tardes and hello everyone. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a real privilege to be here today, to be able to talk these issues with my colleagues. Just going back to the question with regards to the pathway, for us in tech, sustainability is the core of our business. It's very important for us. It helps us and guides us in our business to make sure that we make the right decisions. So obviously being able to work with ICA and being able to develop this pathway is so important for us because it's aligned to what all the members of ICA have committed. And also thinking back on the first video that we saw today, the dates coincide very much with what we as tech are committed to. We're clear that copper is a catalyst that's the heart of this change in energy. We're very clear about that. So we know that we have to be able to respond to the market, but at the same time, take care of how we manage our footprint and how we mine copper in a very responsible way. So we have the same goals that you have, 2050, to have net zero. We also, and I think the colleagues have mentioned that in Chile we have two operations, one Carmen de Andacollo, which has been 100% with decarbonized electricity for a couple of years now. And I'm sure you're aware that we're building a project, QB2. At the moment we have 50% decarbonized electricity, but we have an agreement to go to 100% by 2025. So we're really glad to be able to get that in before we go into operations, that we have made the commitment to use decarbonized electricity by 2025. Another commitment that we have as well is to be able to have a 33% reduction in carbon intensity by 2030. So we see that the pathway is very aligned to where we want to go. We feel that there is there's strength in being able to get together and to build this pathway and to be able to get to where we want to be as a mining industry in general. So I think we'll talk. I'll talk a little bit later on about other initiatives that we have, but I just wanted to address first of all of how our commitment and the way that we worked with ICA for the pathway. So thank you.
No, thank you for those strong words of partnership. And yeah, I think that speaks to the point that clearly the companies are doing a lot on decarbonization, right? But in my mind, then the pathway provides a statement on collective action that the industry is committed to this, right? The word partnership has come up in all of the discussions today. I lead ICA's global partnerships, and I've seen a market shift in the last very few years where we were able to get by on the strength of messages on copper, the material, and it has shifted clearly now to, that's great, but what is the industry itself doing? So we have the pathway, we have the copper mark. And I think the industry is really in a short period of time shown that it is providing the building blocks and taking care of its own house in a responsible way. So then why don't we go in the other direction now for this next go around, Angelica, and I will stay with you. I would like us to be able to talk more about this overall notion of what are the framework conditions that you need to be able to achieve on these very lofty goals that you just described a moment ago. I know that's a big question, but I think it's an important one to bring to the discussion.
Well, I think it's very important for us, and I think lots of words are going to be repeated of what we've seen the last week, and the week before I was in another activity as well, and we were talking about innovation, for example. I mean, I think that's just so key, and as miners, I think we have to lead the way with regards to innovation and also be generous to invite people in to tell us, what it is that we haven't captured quite at the moment, but what we can do, how they're going to be able to help us to get to where we want to be. So innovation with regards to what we talked about, alternative fuels, I think that's really important. Processes becoming more efficient. Also, just taking examples from other industries, I think that's something that maybe we were seen as more closed off. We have to be open now to be able to see what the industries are doing and how that can help us. I think another framework, obviously, we talked about it in the last panel, making sure that we have the right conditions, both financially, legally, and national regulation framework. I think that's important also. And alliances. I think it's really important to have alliances and making sure that we, and it's great to hear what Alta Ley is doing, what everyone was talking about here. I think that's really important to be able to connect and to communicate and to share experiences. For example, we are now in alliance with Caterpillar in order to bring in and vehicles that will be electric. That's going to help us, obviously, with our emissions. As we all know, it's about 70% of our emissions associated to vehicle mobility and haul trucks. So in order to have that alliance with Caterpillar to work together to be able to get vehicles that either are electric or another type of vehicle with a different fuel, but to reduce the diesel emissions, I think that's something that's very important for us right now. And just if we go to the scope 3, I think there's so much we could do with regards to downstream transportation. In Tech Canada, we're looking at alliances with regards to the North Pacific Green Corridor, which I think is something that, when we think about where we are with our project, we have a port that is going to be opening soon. It's things that we should be considering within the mining community. So how do we manage, how do we make alliances, how do we think about maybe a green corridor for our products to be able to go to the markets where they're required right now. So I see that innovation, alliances, regulations, those are the things that we as a company are looking for, and we think of the framework to help us to get to where we see ourselves and where we want to be with regards to climate change.
No, perfect. And alliances is another way of saying partnerships, I think. And even on the regulatory side, I see that as an opportunity for partnership, right? Ensuring that the people that enable you to operate or to not operate are listening to you and understanding that this is what you need to give them what they need, right? So thank you for bringing all of this forward. And I'm going to try to make a laundry list here of the different framework conditions. We'll see how that works out. But Andrea, I started off the debate by saying let's get from the away from the theoretical to reality. And if maybe you could talk about some of the challenges that Freeport is facing and what you're doing to overcome those.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, there's no shortage of challenges along with this amazing opportunity of all this growth. One of them certainly I mentioned before is this idea that, we're trying to expand our brownfields or our existing operations now, right? And in order to have those tons in the next 10 years, right? And this is sort of the challenge of this timeline that we've set for ourselves, right, between now and 2050 is that, if some of these technologies, and let's say ultra-class electric haul trucks, so that's a 400-ton truck, right, that is fully electric at scale, and I think Bernard was saying this before, that's not likely to happen in large scale. I think, Viviana, you said 2028, 2030, and then you have to replace a lot of haul trucks, right? So currently, I think we have 455 haul trucks. Maybe we'll find ways to innovate and reduce that through trolley assist or other technologies and things like that. And so anything that can be done to, again, enhance collaboration, I won't go into that too much because I think you said it beautifully, Angelica, but I think is absolutely critical. I think, interagency cooperation is absolutely critical. One government silo not talking to another government silo, not talking to an NGO, not talking to a mining company, right? We really need to see interagency cooperation We're really glad to start seeing that in the United States. I think we're starting to see that here in Chile, and we were talking about that this morning, actually, at the CESCO seminar, this need for that cooperation, because I think, as was said earlier, right, I think, pointing out this idea that we also have to worry about biodiversity, we have to worry about water, none of these things happen in isolation, right? Everything we do affects everything else from an environmental perspective. And so I think that's critical, and I think without interagency cooperation, and then also just creating these accelerators for technology and innovation. I'll come back to, again, sulfide-bearing ores. If we can leach those, think about that, right? Think about the complete change that could happen. That would be amazing. And so I think for us, those are critical. And then I would also say permitting. I mean, for us in the United States, and in many other countries, the permitting processes are broken. The average time to permit, I would joke, in the United States is never. Right now, if you look at some of the huge copper projects, I know what you went through, which was so disappointing, and so the permitting process as well, and that's a multi-agency thing. And then finally, I would say building trust with our Indigenous partners and our communities, really, because honestly, we can come up with whatever solution we want, and if we don't have social license, we can't do anything. So for us too, thinking about that, as we work to potentially expand El Abra here, as we work to expand any of our other operations, we really have to put building trust first and foremost.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing up the challenges of permitting. And I think it's safe to say that governments sometimes, the expression to speak from both sides of the mouth. The Biden administration has really aggressive decarbonization goals, and President Biden himself at COP27, in his speech, one of the first things he spoke about was the need for secure domestic supply chains, and then to get a project permitted in the U.S. is next to impossible. And you also mentioned the challenges with brownfield expansions, and I'm glad you brought that up as well. Just in the last week or two, ICSG delivered a presentation, and what struck me was when they showed a map of the world and the coming projects in the next very few years. In this part of the world, they were nearly all brownfields. Right. Yep. So maybe that's a good segue to you, Renee. So we talk about the need to increase copper demands for decarbonization and the clean energy transition. Maybe you could speak about the relationship between this expected growth in demands and the development of new mining projects with this lens of decarbonization over it.
It's also very related to what Andrea was saying in terms of, permitting is very important, not only in the US, but in Chile as well. I think we are in a very important place right now because we know that copper is going to play a big role in the low carbon economy. We know that demand is going to increase. We've been talking about this the whole week, give or take, it's going to be double at least, the requirements of copper in the world in the next 20 years. Chile has been stuck, let's say, give or take 5 million tons per year. And we need to produce more copper, of course. And so as a country, we're in a very privileged situation nowadays, and I think we need to make the most of this opportunity. This morning I was in an event with more than 1,000 people, and the president of the country was there, and he was acknowledging the need for expediting the permitting process and to provide clarity to investors, both locally and foreign investors as well, because we've got something there. And we're not saying that rule needs to be, loses. No, we need clarity, and we're going to stick to that. And of course, we're going to be producing products that make sense for everybody, of course. I must say, though, Steve, that we were talking about the pathway to 2050. What we're hearing nowadays, more and more from investors and analysts and all of that, is that 2050 sounds like long distance shot, So they are asking now about 2030, So tell me about your targets for 2030. Tell me how much you're going to be abutting. What is the capex that you're considering for that? And how are you going to do it, actually? So talking about paying lip services, as you were referring before, in another context, of course, when it's happening to us. So Antofagasta, we're very much working on that. So we need to make clear that these are the projects we've got. We can mention it. This is the capex that is involved in these particular projects. And this is the way we're going to be delivering the promises that we make. And for that, of course, we discovered that, yes, Scope 2 is, because we are a privileged country, we've got solar, wind, everything here, hydro. Roughly 60% of our energy now is renewable, so Scope 2 is great for us. Scope 1, we are working on what I said before. Actually, Veronica is here from ICMM. 2 weeks ago, was it, Alejandra? We hosted the first forum on innovation for cleaner and safer vehicles with ICMM. So all our companies were there. So the good news is that you're seeing a lot of sharing happening already. So we were learning from Anglo on the hydrogen. We were sharing what we were doing on Centinela. BHP was also sharing, and all our companies were sharing there. And now there's more and more interaction between ourselves and also OEMs, because we are all on the same page, which is good. So there's a synchronicity in terms of the challenges that we've got as an agenda for the sector. So I would say that we need to speed up the pace here in this country. We need to have more clarity in order for the investment to be happening, of course. Copper is going to be key for the low carbon economy, and then we need to bring more and more people on board. And lastly, Scope 3. This is critical. I mean, give or take numbers, 70% of our emissions are coming from Scope 3, okay? And with ICMM, of course, we are also working on the methodology for assessing Scope 3 in a very formal way. So we're very much, I think we're going to be closing that methodology very, very soon. So all the companies could be, disclosing Scope 3 emissions. And with that, we already know that basically 60% of that is coming from purchases of goods and services. So what we do with that? So Antofagasta, what we've done is that two examples. First of all, on the bidding processes, for all contracts above $10 million that are carbon intense, we have set an internal carbon pricing. And we are using that shadow carbon pricing to assess those contracts. And things have changed. Contracts that were, being given to some companies were not given to those companies anymore. So you've got more and more players because they're seeing that there are incentives coming from this company in particular to make sure that our contracts are, having, lower carbon intensity. So that's important. And second, particularly in the second region, where we've got 3 of our 4 operations, we are working with our suppliers and with the University Católica del Norte to provide training, to explain how to measure your carbon footprint, to explain how to develop a plan for decarbonization, because sometimes we talk a lot about decarbonization plans, but some, vendors and suppliers, they don't have not even the people to think about that. So we are providing this means of help in this sort of collaboration, public-private collaboration. The academy is involved as well. So we're bringing everybody along. I would say that the more people we bring together, the more collaboration is happening, the targets are going to be met earlier.
So again, partnerships comes to the equation. I'll amplify a couple of those very good points. And yeah, 2050 seems very, very far away, right? Many of us in the room will have long since been retired by then. But I'll point back to Inger Anderson's comments where she also said, and she used the words, "Let me be clear." And she talked about the need for targets and transparency and steps along the way to 2050. Okay. And then on the point on permitting, very encouraging news from Chile today. Again, hopefully it's not a false start, but then even there, maybe an opportunity for partnership. Maybe Chile becomes a test case for what reform could look like in this space and brings it to other parts of the world. So let's continue to watch that space closely. Marcela, if it's okay, I want to come back to green hydrogen with you. We hear about green hydrogen all the time. You've already said a bit, but maybe if you could say a bit more, and maybe you have some expectations of what the future for that looks like for the industry broadly, and also use this time if there are any of the challenges that you're seeing that you want to bring to light.
Well, I think that it has been said here, the word innovation so many times. When we disclose our new purpose, that was to reimagine mining to improve people's life, and the sustainable mining plan was based on what we call future smart mining. So everything comes down from future smart mining. And that's how hydrogen appears as one of the options. But as I said, it depends on the countries and the situation of each country and the energy grid and many other circumstances. Hydrogen is a challenge and it's very, very expensive today. We know that. We know it's going to take a long time until we may, it could be feasible, let's say in Chile. But we know that in between, there are going to be so many technological changes, and we may improve the emissions or the intensity using some other fuels in between, or moving for electric and then afterwards moving to hydrogen. So I think there's going to be a pathway. It's not that we are going to go to hydrogen, you know, as a first option. It's in the long term or in the medium term. Like, for example, with the scope 3, our transportation, that is a huge issue for us as well, as you mentioned. For example, we have new vessels run by natural gas. And in fact, yes, there is a huge discussion about natural gas and carbon neutrality and so on. But, well, in the meantime, it's better to have some vessels run with natural gas instead of diesel and so on, until we get the technology with the hydrogen for vessels. Because, for example, with the scope 3 emissions, we have a target to have our own shipping, the part of the shipping that we control, our vessels, to be carbon neutral by 2040. And that is a big challenge for us as well. So, and that is why the transition with natural gas now until we get to that target. And also I would like to mention something about the providers or the suppliers here, because we are also working with Alta Ley with the calculator, this methodology, and we will participate in the traceability process that we may have with the suppliers here. I think that we need to focus, there are, of course, different type of providers, and we have small ones and larger ones. So the larger ones have their own targets as well, and they have developed their own targets and their pathway. And so when they reduce their scope 1, they help us with our scope 3. But we need to help the smaller ones, the medium size. I think that there is a big range of companies in Chile that are in the medium size that they need some help from the bigger companies to go through this just transition. Their transition.
So partnerships come out again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
and thank you for highlighting too that this is a transition, right? The pundits also want us to flip a switch and you're going to decarbonize. There's going to be bridge fuels that are needed before we get to green hydrogen, and that's just one example, I think. And I'm sorry to have to jumped in there a little bit because we're running a little bit behind, and I would like to get to the audience for at least a couple of minutes. Time goes quickly. I'm watching my watch here. And then lastly, Nicole, maybe just your own perspectives from Codelco on the challenges of what it will take to achieve this pathway for Codelco and even for mining more broadly.
I think I share a lot what you have said. One thing is to have a clear roadmap. For us, that was a difficult challenge because we need to draw it early and now to review it and to update it all the time. I think that is very, very important. Otherwise, if your company has any economical issues or some I don't know, day-to-day problems, you will forget about your roadmap. So you need to have a strong roadmap. Also, transparency is very, very important. To report frequently, to use a known methodology, and also to give the information to all the people that wants to have it, that everyone can follow you. I think that is very important to plan it well and also to show how your progress are going on. That one thing that for us it's been a nice challenge. Maybe the second challenge is innovation. We know that we have done it, that we improve a lot our emissions, reducing our emissions with the current technologies. But we know that we are not going to get to carbon neutrality with these current technologies. We need to be the leadership and to help others to trust them and to try different, I don't know, initiatives. We need to be very creative, and I think that the mining industry have that role. And the third one, I think that everyone has mentioned, is Scope 3. I think that that's the most challenging challenge, and it's related to Scope 3, because what you're really doing is changing your value chain, and that's very strong. You don't want to change only your process, you also want to change the systems and the key actors of your system, and that is a very difficult one. In Scope 3, we still don't have a goal. I hope that at the end of the year or soon we can have one. But we have been working a lot. As you say, partnership. We work with Alta Ley, Aprimin, and also Tsunami to develop this calculator emission. That it's a very strong tool. It was developed last year. And we know that ICMM is working on that, so we will update it, but we didn't want to wait for that. I have some numbers. Yeah, we have done 2 studies, 2 local studies, and we get that 25 or 50% of our emissions were related, of the mining emissions were from our suppliers. Maybe it's more, as you said, but we don't know. But first, there are a lot. And second, depending on how you measure, it could be 25, 50, 70, so it's an issue. And then what we have done was to make a survey to our suppliers. And I can say, well, it was very interesting, that survey, but as a result, 75% or even more said, well, I don't measure them, but I will do it if it's easy, simple, and standard. So that provoked us to make this experiment, this tool. Where are we heading? Today we are preparing, training our suppliers. Also, they are part of our bindings on the assessment of our suppliers. And also we are working with the environmental ministry just to make it an official tool and to be part of this Huella Chile. So first it's going to be a free, public, and standard technology, standard methodology for everyone. And second, it's going to be a formal tool, so anyone that wants to participate in our processes can do it and don't need to go to different links or whatever. So we are really working for doing it easy and to be an example or to be taken from other industries. We don't know, but I think it's important. I think that changing our value chain is the most difficult thing to do.
No, I agree, and I think that's maybe a good point to end this part of the discussion on, because, and thank you for bringing up the word partnership, so I don't have to do it again. I would like to go to the audience with some questions. Please state your name, your organization. However, this is not a free-flow, open press conference. The topic should be focused on decarbonization and the roadmap. So please, we have some roving microphones. And we have first hands up there. And then if we could keep the answers to 1 minute or less. Our old colleague, Scott, used to say, be brief, be bright, and be gone. The 3 Bs, yeah?
Yeah, hi, all of you. This is Luca Tagini from BHP. First of all, thanks for the presentations and the transparency of the answers. So one sort of topic that was mentioned in all of the presentations is the topic of on-site generation. That is very common in Australia or in islanded grids. That is not really the case of Chile. We in BHP see that as a topic of concern because regulation is not very clear on that. And if we look at a way to bring down energy costs by avoiding system charges or transmission tolls, And also linked to what McKinsey presented in their green hydrogen roadmap and Alta Ley as well in the roadmap for Chile and for Peru. That's really a lever that we miners need in order to make more sort of economically attractive ways to displace scope 1 ultimately. Any thoughts on on-site generation, and if you share that view that regulation needs to pick up?
Does anyone want to jump in on that?
You've got the thing there in the tail of them.
Yours.
We have an on-site generation, and here in Las Tórtolas as well. We build a solar plant, and we are planning, or we are studying the case to expand the existing one. But as you said, the regulation is something complicated because of the systemic cost and the amount that we can generate for ourselves. But we see it as an option in the future.
In our case, it was different. Sorry, you were, okay. So we've started like 10 years ago, but we always thought about providing energy for the grid at the very beginning. So Antofagasta was investing, resources in starting businesses, when the old renewable energy wave came to the country. So we started, investing on that. Then we thought that part of the job was done, and then, other players came and they bought those, facilities, and they are providing energy for us right now. But what we've got is basically thermoelectrical power now, and we've got that on site. So with that, we are heating our solutions. So we got rid of, diesel in particular. So now we're using solar energy for those, solutions, heating processing. So that's what we got. But we don't have what Marcela was saying from Anglo already. And some regulation might be considered to change that. But so far, the incentives are, for us at least, to buy, energy from the grid.
Yeah. And Helica, did you have something to add?
Just to say more or less the same thing. I think it's something that's really interesting, considering sort of the capabilities that Chile has to have either wind or solar power. So I think it's always something that you're thinking about, and it's something that we'll probably be looking into, but not necessarily at the moment. We have enough energy that we have from the grid, and we understand that's giving us our decarb sort of electricity. But I think it's an interesting point. I don't think it's something that's going to go away. Just because of who we are as Chile, we're very capable of doing that.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and thanks for those answers. Any other questions from the floor? We have a hands in the back there.
Thank you very much. A question about the OEMs.
I'm sorry, your name and
Yes, Melanie Boneder from NG Impact. So I have a question regarding fleet transition. A lot of the mining companies have specific reduction targets for, let's say, 2030, and you mentioned collaboration with OEMs who also have similar targets for 2028, 2030. How would you then see that transition work out in practice if the targets of the different company groups are so close to each other? Is that already part of your supply chain strategies? Thank you.
It's a great question. Andrea, please.
So, and this is just Freeport's view, obviously, but our 2030 goals are not going to be met by OEM solutions for haul trucks. Our 2040 and 2050 goals will be met by solutions for haul trucks. We will not see, and not in our case anyway, for our mine setups and the way that we are operating now, we won't see that happen. And so them having targets for 2028, 2030 is fantastic. Let's see them get there. Let's get it to scale. And then 2030 to 2040 is where we'll, so the 15% and the 30% and the 35% and the 50%, all those targets that we have for 2030, none of those are reliant on electric haul trucks.
Okay, thanks for that, and for a reality check too on that topic. Any other questions from the audience, Steve? And then maybe we'll close after that.
Thanks, Steve. Steve Higgins with Freeport-McMoRan. So I have a concern and then maybe a statement, and I'd be interested in reactions to it. But and all the work, and I don't want to diminish any of the good work that you all described here in terms of the industry's effort to decarbonize. It's critically important, and I'm fully supportive of it. But one of the concerns that I think I have is that we're going to be in a capital constrained environment. We always are, and we will be through 2030 or 2050. We're also likely to be in a talent constrained environment in terms of technical talent and innovation. Those things will be challenging, you know, for some of the adoption of these transitions and technologies. But Steve, in your opening remarks, you made the comment about that the copper mining industry is a relatively modest part of global carbon generation, but yet is a very consequential part of global carbon reduction as an enabling material. And so my statement is, I think we always have to keep in mind and remind ourselves and remind others that the best thing that we can do from a global societal benefit is to produce more copper. And so we have to keep that in mind. Doesn't mean we don't do this work. It's critically important, and I'm not suggesting we don't, but I think we have to keep that in front of us and make sure that that discussion point is part of the narrative. Apologize, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that needed to be said. I mean, you really also just encapsulated that the framework conditions has to be right for you to be able to produce that more copper, and you highlighted a couple of those challenges. CapEx is a big issue. How do you bring the finance to the table, especially on projects where it's uncertain when they're even going to have a shovel in the ground? You know, I mentioned that, you know, energy efficiency. What we want to build here is one where the CapEx is taken care of through like an energy services company, so the companies themselves aren't paying for it, but reducing their energy costs. And talent, I think, is always an issue in all parts of the world. Having skilled workforces is just one thing. And then even attracting young people is hard. I mean, you know, we have generations that still look at us this way. We're an extractive industry, and that's all that they see. They don't see that their lifestyles depend on what this industry is doing, right? So how do you, you know, while you're doing all these things, change the narrative around the next generations so that they appreciate and embrace what's being done and want to be a part of it going forward. So I'll get off my soapbox now and see if there are any reflections. Nicole, please.
To say something complementary is that yes, but also each company has their own goal, but also we are operating in different countries. In the case of Chile, there is a goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And the mining sector is 15–16% of that emission. So we need to have a strong position and helping the whole system. So I think it depends from where you see it.
All right, and I think we're a few minutes over time, and we could really talk for hours and hours, but this was a fantastic panel. Thank you all for your contributions, and then you can ask questions of them in the break. Yeah.
Okay, here we are. As Steve said, was a fantastic panel. We are almost ending our seminar, so please have a seat. I would like to thank Steve, also Marcela, Nicole, Renee, and Angelica for this outstanding panel. Really, really good interaction, good exchange. That's all about, as we were talking, that is a common goal. So congratulations to all of you. So to end our seminar, I would like to leave with you Mr. Fernando Lucchini, who is the Executive President of Alta Ley Corporation, who will address a few words. Fernando, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm closing, and I'll be very brief, I promise. This has been a little bit longer than expected, but I think the appreciations and the comments from all the speakers have been remarkable. So I'm convinced it's been worth it. I'll be brief, especially, and Victor looks at me and I remember now, I have to invite you all. We have a cocktail prepared for everyone in the ground floor. So please, right after my words, you're all invited to come with us and share in that cocktail. And I would like to start these closing remarks by thanking everyone, of course, thanking everyone that made this possible, our partners, the ICA, CESCO for sponsoring, all the speakers, the authorities that came, and of course, all the audience, all of you that have bared with us for these couple hours, and the online audience too, of course. I have these brief closing remarks that unsurprisingly have turned into a wrap-up, a summary of all the fantastic comments, appreciations, and knowledge shared by our speakers. But I'll go anyway, because I think they highlight a few points. And we started this seminar up here with Tony from the ICA, with a video from the UN, with a vision and with a mission to decarbonize. And we went remarkably deep into all the actions that means for our industry and all the technologies, partnerships that have to be taken care of for that to actually happen. So I'll start with global climate action, because it's global climate action that has driven the development of movements like electromobility and the production of energy from renewable sources, all, as I said, in order to decarbonize the global economy. Yet, as it was said many times, this technology will certainly grow the demand for copper and other minerals as a key element for its development. A green society and green economies will require more metals, and I'm certain that we're all very aware of that in this room. So right there, the global leadership of Latin America, of the Chilean, Peruvian, Brazilian, Mexican, and all the other countries' mining sectors to produce copper and other metals in a sustainable manner, facing the challenges of the climate crisis, meeting international societal and market requirements, will be key to achieve these goals. As Bernard very clearly exposed, we have a double mission. We have to produce, and we're being asked to produce more and more, whilst emitting less when producing more, whilst being more and more sustainable and taking more care of our ecosystems and biodiversity, again, when producing more. Hence, as we've seen, global mining companies that are operating in Latin America have committed to decarbonization targets in the short, medium, and long term, and renewable energies, green hydrogen, decarbonization of mining supplies, penetration of new mining technologies, and circular economy are having a protagonist role in this process. The mining sector is an essential catalyst in Latin America to drive and shape this unique opportunity in the most important copper mining cluster in the world. And especially in our country, in Chile, there are unique conditions for these green technologies to thrive. We have fantastic radiation conditions. We have desalination infrastructure. We have the demand right next to the supply, and we have plenty of logistics infrastructure already in place for that to work. All this, nonetheless, of course, has enabling elements such as incorporation of relevant infrastructure for the new technologies to happen, the consideration of the regulation that's needed to make this possible, and that's public innovation that's not very often talked about, but it's a topic that we've gone into throughout this seminar several times. The development of human capital, the scaling of new technologies and processes that use electricity and green hydrogen, among many other challenges that, but as it was said during the seminar too, represent also new opportunities for our economy. Accordingly, the aim of this decarbonization initiative in the region is for the mining ecosystem in Latin America to become the main carbon neutral mining hub in the world around the competitive development of green mining technologies, collaboration, partnerships, alliances, that was said plenty of times, research, development, and innovation, and the generation of socioeconomic value and quality of life in the Latin American region. We would like to invite you all not only to contribute on measuring the potential of decarbonization in your companies, in our ecosystems and sectors, but also to take further steps to make this dream come true. And as it was said by our colleague from the United Nations at the very beginning in that video, we know that we don't have much time, even though 2050 sounds like very far from here. We don't have much time to make that dream happen. Therefore, we have already kick-started this work with several major producers in order to keep advancing these matters in collaboration with the ecosystem, particularly to reduce Scope 3 emissions that have been regarded here as the most difficult challenge. And to finish, I would like to cite yesterday's speakers at the CESCO dinner, Olivia Lazard from Carnegie Europe, that very well portrayed that maybe finally one could say miners right now can be the superheroes of this story. But with more power comes more responsibility too. Thank you very much.
En todo el mundo ha comenzado el cambio hacia un planeta carbono neutral. La necesidad de sistemas adicionales de energía renovable, tecnología y maquinaria sitúa el cobre en el centro de esta transición. Tanto los sistemas de energía tradicionales como los renovables dependen del cobre para operaciones eficientes y la demanda de cobre se duplicará a nivel mundial para 2050. Los miembros de la International Copper Association reconocen su responsabilidad de reducir sus propias emisiones. La reducción de las emisiones de la industria amplía el poder de net zero a las soluciones tecnológicas que aprovechan el cobre como parte de la transición energética. Los miembros de ICA se han comprometido con el objetivo de llevar sus emisiones de alcance 1 y 2 de la producción de net zero para 2050. Para lograrlo, los miembros seguirán el Pathway to Net Zero, que establece 4 medidas de reducción. Electricidad descarbonizada. Comprar energía verde a través de acuerdos de compra de energía o utilizar la generación de energía renovable in situ. Combustibles alternativos. Cambiar a combustibles alternativos como hidrógeno verde o biogás. Electrificación de equipos, desde hornos hasta camiones de acarreo. Gran parte del equipo necesario para la producción de cobre puede electrificarse. Y por último, la eficiencia energética. Mejoras constantes en la eficiencia energética garantizarán que la energía que utilicen los miembros ICA llegue más lejos. Los miembros de ICA también maximizarán las asociaciones a lo largo de toda la cadena de valor para asegurar el cobre como una solución sostenible a largo plazo. Estas asociaciones serán fundamentales para llevar nuestras emisiones de alcance 3 lo más cerca posible del net zero para 2050. Para que todo esto sea posible, la industria del cobre requiere condiciones propicias clave, como el acceso a electricidad limpia y un entorno normativo eficaz. Hacer estos cambios no solo reducirá las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, sino también mejorará el medio ambiente y la calidad de vida de las comunidades locales. Los miembros de ICA ya han comenzado el cambio a net zero. El programa Pathway to the Net Zero complementa y refuerza estos esfuerzos de descarbonización. La industria que está ayudando a otros sectores a descarbonizarse ahora se está descarbonizando. Este es el poder de cero.